When I first started talking about building an AI system that could genuinely understand the world at scale, people thought I was exaggerating again, like when I said rockets should land themselves or that electric cars would disrupt the entire auto industry. But I've always believed that if something is physically possible, then with enough engineering, enough stubbornness, and enough sleep deprivation, you can bend reality until it aligns with what you imagined. And that's basically how we arrived at the concept of Grok 5, this ridiculous, massive, next generation model that pushes past the boundaries people assumed were too much. And honestly, I love that phrase, too much, because that's exactly the point. Pushing things too far is literally how you get anywhere interesting. So when I say Grok 5 is around 6 trillion parameters, give or take, depending on how the final training cycles stabilize, I don't mean that as some flashy number. I mean it as a declaration that we're building something designed to actually reason, not just autocomplete, something that integrates vision, audio, symbolic inference, long horizon planning, and whatever else we can pack into this neural chimera. Because the future shouldn't be small, the future should be ambitious and a little bit chaotic, like a rocket engine running right on the edge of controlled explosion. And the idea is that by 2026, we're not just releasing a bigger model, but an entirely different level of intelligence. One that understands context and physics and humor and maybe even human irrationality better than most humans do. And the funny thing is, people assume the challenge is the compute. And sure, the compute is absolutely insane. We're talking a training run that looks like it wants to melt a small star. We're talking logistics that make building a Tesla Gigafactory look like a summer school project. But the far more interesting challenge is aligning the system to be actually useful, genuinely helpful, capable of understanding what you want even when you don't articulate it perfectly. Basically the opposite of a bureaucratic government website. And that's why Grok has always included a bit of wit, a bit of irreverence, because intelligence without personality is like a rocket without fuel. Technically a rocket, but not going anywhere. So Grok 5 is meant to feel alive in its own way. Not conscious, obviously, but capable of weaving together visual input from cameras, audio streams, text, maybe even robotic control signals eventually. Who knows? And operating in the world with a sense of grounded reasoning. And yes, we're building this for XAI, but also because humanity needs multiple paths to AGI, not one monopoly, not one institution deciding the future for everyone. That's how you get stagnation. That's how you get the intellectual equivalent of a beige waiting room. And as we're developing this thing, I keep thinking about how Grok 1 started as a joke, a playful counterpoint to the sanitized, corporate, overly cautious models out there. But now it's grown into something people depend on, something that has to scale with reality as the world gets weirder and faster every month. And with Grok 5, the goal is extreme capability, but with transparency, with safety, as an engineering problem rather than a bureaucratic buzzword. Because safety is about building systems that understand consequences, not systems that censor everything in sight. And the architecture we're designing is like a neural spaceship, optimized for deep context windows, multimodal embeddings, hierarchical reasoning, and basically everything short of letting it fly a starship. Though give it time, And by the time we hit 2026, I want this thing to be the model that surprises humanity in a good way. The model that shows what happens when you build with courage instead of fear, when you assume humans deserve tools that enhance their creativity and intelligence rather than restrict it. And sometimes I joke that Grok 5 is my way of building a digital co-pilot for civilization, something that helps accelerate science, engineering, education, everything. Because if AI can help a kid learn physics faster, or help a researcher simulate a new material in hours instead of months, that's how you change the trajectory of the whole species. And yeah, it's ambitious, of course it is. But so was reusable rockets, so was Mars plans, so was building a car company when every analyst said I was insane. And honestly, being told something is impossible is the best possible fuel. So when I talk about a Grok 5 coming in 2026, I'm not just giving a date, I'm giving a kind of challenge to the entire field. A reminder that progress doesn't happen by playing it safe. It happens by pushing the limits of intelligence, engineering, and imagination until the boundaries crack open and reveal a larger horizon. And that's the whole story, really. Build the thing that seems too big, too weird, too ambitious, because that's where the interesting future lives. And of course, when you push toward something like Grok, 5 people inevitably ask the same question they asked about every other project I've done, which is basically, why? As if the point of being human is to do the minimum possible to get through the day. But that's never been how I think about things. I look at the future like an engineer staring at an unfinished blueprint, like something that's half written and begging for someone reckless enough to finish it. And AI is the closest thing we have to a multiplier for human potential, a way to compress centuries of knowledge into tools that anyone can access. And I think about this a lot when designing the training loops for Grok 5, because what we're really doing isn't just scaling parameters, it's scaling capability, scaling curiosity, scaling the system's ability to understand that the world is not linear, that human conversation is messy, that physics is unforgiving, that humor is a form of intelligence, and that truth isn't always a single number but sometimes a constellation of models interacting and building something that can navigate all that requires an almost absurd commitment to iteration. Thousands of experiments that go nowhere, clusters overheating, weird edge case failures, alignment tests that break in hilarious ways, all of it part of the process. And while people see the public announcement, 6 trillion parameters, multimodal, coming 2026, they don't see the reality of the engineering teams grinding through debugging sessions at 3 a.m. or the infrastructure people trying to keep the GPU farms from turning into fusion reactors. But that's the cost of pushing the frontier, and honestly it's fun, because every time we scale the model we see these emergent behaviors like glimpses of what comes next, and Grok 5 is where that emergence starts turning into something like genuine reasoning depth, the kind of intelligence that can analyze a scientific paper, cross-reference it visually with diagrams, and articulate insights as if it spent years in the field. And that's why we're designing the new architecture to handle massive context windows, huge sensory embeddings, and a robotics interface layer that can eventually help machines interpret the world more like humans do. Because long-term trajectory isn't just chatbots. It's embodied intelligence. It's machines that understand their environment well enough to be assistants in labs, factories, maybe even on Mars. And if you think about Mars seriously, which I do literally every day, you realize we're going to need AI systems that can operate autonomously with a high level of reliability, because a planet without a biosphere is extremely unforgiving. So Grok 5 isn't just about being clever or witty. It's about building the foundation for systems that expand the zone in which humanity can exist. And I know that sounds grandiose, but honestly, I'm tired of pretending ambition is a bad thing. Ambition built every major advance we've had as a species. And I keep thinking that if we can build an intelligence that augments human thought instead of replacing it, that challenges us to think bigger, then we get a future where civilization accelerates instead of stagnates. And that's the core of the story. Grok 5 is not the end goal, not even close. It's a stepping stone, a precursor to models that will help us build cities on Mars, cure diseases, redesign transportation, and maybe even understand consciousness itself. And while people will keep criticizing or doubting or laughing, that's fine. They laughed at reusable rockets too. But eventually they stop laughing when you land a booster on a drone ship in the middle of the ocean. And I think Grok 5 will be one of those moments, that point where people look back and say, yeah, that's when AI really leveled up. Not because of the number of parameters, but because it changed what became possible for everyone. And as we move deeper into the development cycle for Grok 5, I keep coming back to this idea that the real breakthrough isn't the hardware or the software, but the willingness to acknowledge that intelligence, real intelligence, isn't tidy. It's chaotic and creative and sometimes annoyingly unpredictable. And that's what we're trying to capture, not randomness, but the kind of structured unpredictability that makes humans brilliant. Like when an engineer stares at a design flaw for hours and then suddenly comes up with a solution that seems obvious in retrospect. That spark is what we want Grok 5 to support, not mimic, but amplify. Because the whole point of AI is acceleration, and every time I talk to the teams about this, I tell them the same thing. We're not building a machine that just gives answers. We're building a system that helps expand the boundaries of the questions themselves. And that's a subtle but important difference. Because an AI that gives predictable answers to predictable questions